For most of his life, Michael Caine appeared to be a man defined by control. Control over his voice, his image, his career, and his emotions. Audiences saw discipline, resilience, and an almost unbreakable professionalism that carried him across generations of cinema. But documentaries exist to question surfaces, not admire them. And when you examine Michael Caine's life closely, a different story emerges. One not driven by fame or ambition, but by survival. Long before awards, wealth, or recognition, his world was shaped by instability, fear, and quiet endurance. The roots of his strength were not glamorous. They were forged in poverty, wartime displacement, and childhood trauma that taught him a single lesson early on. Keep going, no matter the cost. This is not a story about celebrity success. It is a study of inherited endurance, of emotional restraint passed down like an unspoken code. And at the center of it all stands a woman whose sacrifices remained invisible for half a century, shaping a son who never knew he was following her example. As we revisit Michael Caine's life, the question becomes unavoidable. Was his tireless work ethic a choice, or a legacy he never learned how to escape? Michael Caine was born into a London that offered very little margin for weakness. His childhood was not filled with dreams of acting or stardom, but with uncertainty and scarcity. His family lived hand to mouth, relying on exhausting labor just to survive the week. When war arrived, it stripped away what little stability existed. Like many children of that era, Michael was evacuated, sent away under the promise of safety. What followed instead was cruelty. The abuse he endured while living with strangers taught him silence, obedience, and emotional containment. These were not personality traits, they were survival strategies. When his mother intervened and brought him home, the physical danger ended, but the psychological blueprint remained. Home itself offered no comfort. Their house was destroyed, replaced by cramped temporary housing that stretched into years. Privacy vanished. Security never arrived. In that environment, ambition felt risky, almost inappropriate. Endurance became the goal. Acting did not enter his life as a passion, but as an escape route. Even humiliation on stage felt preferable to invisibility. From the beginning, Michael learned that being seen, even imperfectly, was better than disappearing. That belief would follow him for the rest of his life. War returned to Michael's life in another form when he was called for national service and sent to Korea. There, whatever innocence he still carried dissolved completely. Combat showed him what institutions could do to ordinary people when power went unchecked. Then came illness. Cerebral malaria nearly ended his life, turning him into a medical subject rather than a patient. Immobilized, experimented on, and stripped of dignity, he confronted mortality in its rawest form. It was during this period that Michael made a promise that would quietly govern his life. If he survived, he would never waste time. But survival did not lead to immediate success. Returning home, he entered an industry deeply shaped by class prejudice. His accent marked him as unsuitable. His background made him easy to dismiss. Years passed in rejection, financial instability, and heavy drinking used to dull the fear that he might never escape his circumstances. Early marriage failed under that pressure. Jobs unrelated to acting filled the gaps, reinforcing a familiar feeling of stagnation. Even when opportunities arrived, they were fragile, conditional, and easily revoked. Yet what stands out is not his frustration, but his refusal to stop. For Michael, stopping felt more dangerous than failure. As his career slowly gained momentum, Michael adapted rather than resisted. He studied people obsessively, learning how authority moved, how confidence looked, how power could be performed even when it was not granted. This adaptability became his signature. But while audiences celebrated his rise, another truth remained hidden. For decades, his mother had been carrying a secret that shaped the emotional atmosphere of their home without anyone realizing it. Only much later, through an offhand question from a journalist, did Michael learn that his family story had been incomplete. His mother had a firstborn son, David, placed in an institution as a child due to severe disabilities. In an era with little compassion and no support, she was told to let go. She never did. Instead, she lived a double life of devotion. Every week, she left the house under ordinary pretenses and traveled alone to visit a child the world had erased. She never spoke of it, not to her husband, not to her sons. Her silence was not shame, it was protection. And that silence shaped the household Michael grew up in more than anyone understood. When Michael finally understood what his mother had carried alone for over 50 years, it reframed everything. Her emotional restraint, her refusal to complain, her relentless consistency suddenly made sense. She had built her life around endurance without recognition. Michael recognized himself in that pattern. The discipline that defined him, the instinct to keep moving through pain, the discomfort with vulnerability, none of it was accidental. It was inherited. His mother's love had been expressed through action, not words. Through presence, not explanation. That realization arrived too late for deep conversation. David passed away before Michael truly knew him, leaving behind a sense of loss layered onto an already heavy life. But understanding does not always bring comfort. Sometimes it brings clarity. Michael saw that his relentless work ethic was not ambition. It was imitation. He had spent decades unconsciously honoring a model of love defined by sacrifice and silence. The question then becomes unsettling. If endurance is learned, can it ever be unlearned? Or does it become a permanent rhythm, impossible to silence even when the world finally offers rest? By the time Michael entered his later years, success surrounded him, but inner rest did not. Alcohol crept back into his life, not as celebration, but as numbing routine. Then something unexpected interrupted that cycle. A brief television moment introduced him to Shakira Baksh, a woman whose calm presence contrasted sharply with his internal chaos. Their connection was not built on glamour or rescue fantasies. It was built on boundaries. Shakira did not demand transformation. She simply made it clear that disorder had no place in the life she envisioned. For the first time, Michael chose clarity over escape. He stopped drinking, stepped away from excess, and discovered stability not through control, but through mutual respect. Their marriage did not soften his work ethic, but it grounded it. She understood that his need to keep working was not ego. It was survival memory. She accepted it without trying to fix it. In doing so, she became the one person who could hold space for the man behind the legend. Not the performer, but the survivor still moving forward because stopping felt unfamiliar, even dangerous. Throughout the 1970s, Michael's career puzzled critics. He appeared constantly, often in films that damaged his reputation rather than elevated it. But prestige was never his primary measurement. Continuity was. Working meant structure. Structure meant safety. A bad role could be survived. Stillness could not. Audiences mocked his choices, but they missed the deeper truth. Michael had lived through war, hunger, illness, and institutional cruelty. Public embarrassment did not scare him. Inactivity did. Over time, the industry caught up. His later performances revealed depth, restraint, and emotional intelligence earned through decades of observation. Awards followed, but even recognition could not disrupt his internal logic. On the night he won an Oscar, he was not present. He was working. The explanation he later offered was simple and misunderstood. It was not greed. It was relief. Financial security represented freedom from the fear that once defined his childhood. For someone shaped by scarcity, stopping work did not feel like success. It felt like vulnerability. Aging eventually imposed limits that discipline could not overcome. Chronic pain and degenerative illness forced Michael to slow down. Movement required planning. Independence narrowed. The industry adjusted quietly, offering fewer roles, preparing for absence. For someone whose identity was built on forward motion, retirement felt less like rest and more like disappearance. Days stretched. Silence returned. Old habits resurfaced, waiting for calls that no longer came. Even public perception shifted. He was spoken of in the past tense while still alive. Humor masked discomfort, but privately, the loss of purpose unsettled him deeply. Writing, gardening, and reflection filled the hours, but they could not fully replace the structure of work. The cane became symbolic of a deeper fear. What happens when the body enforces stillness on a mind trained to endure through motion? For Michael, stopping was not neutral. It echoed childhood waiting, uncertainty, and helplessness. And so when opportunities appeared, even impractical ones, he accepted them. Not to prove relevance, but to maintain meaning. At 92, looking back across nearly a century, Michael Caine reached a quiet understanding. His life had not been driven by ambition or even love of acting. It had been driven by loyalty. Loyalty to an unspoken example set by his mother. Ellen's weekly journeys, her lifelong silence, her refusal to abandon duty even when unseen, had written a rule he followed instinctively. Keep going. Do not burden others. Do not stop. Work became his language of respect. Continuing to act was not denial of aging. It was continuation of purpose. Retirement felt wrong because it symbolized abandonment of that inherited code. In honoring his own persistence, he was honoring hers. Purpose, he realized, does not expire with age or pain. It transforms. And perhaps the greatest misunderstanding of his career was the assumption that he worked to stay famous. In truth, he worked to stay faithful to the values that saved him long before the world knew his name. So the question remains, and it is one worth asking beyond celebrity stories. Should Michael Caine have retired, or was continuing to work his way of honoring the woman who shaped him? Was rest ever truly an option for someone raised on endurance? His story challenges how we define success, strength, and legacy. It asks whether stopping is always healthy, or whether for some, motion is meaning. Michael Caine's life reminds us that survival strategies do not disappear when circumstances improve. They evolve, and sometimes what looks like refusal to let go is actually devotion to something deeply human. The invisible sacrifices of a parent, the inheritance of resilience, the quiet belief that showing up again and again is a form of love. What do you think? Was his continued work an act of denial or an act of respect? Share your thoughts below, because stories like this don't end on screen. They continue in the conversations we choose to have.